depending on what comes out, they may ask you for some money. So they just interview someone for a podcast.
No one really knows for sure. Elevate, allocate. But this is we're doing this bitch on it. 3761 creation of the world. That'll make how about 36, 31, 36, 34, 36, 325 Keenan, son of Enoch. Was born 366, 395 all time. Here, the son of Hell was born. Berkadada Nile, Hanam al Ka'alam, Shirkadishana, Mustaf Tabanu, Al Sephirat Ha Omer. Blessed be Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is 40 days of the Omer, which makes Omer, which is 5 weeks of the Omer. May the merciful one rebuild, I don't know, the full one restore unto us the service of the faith place. May the merciful one restore the United States. Amen. Okay, you done? Doug, I would always sponsor day 40 of the Omer count. Why? Why not?
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Estica, where we explore philosophy and religion, starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, just habit, or that Kabbalah just positions as really tenable. Such developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. They're now, and they're at a school introduction to Jew and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel unto the rise of modern in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means. Bring forward deeper study and reflection, and hopefully historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly. Let me express my gratitude to Congress lectures here on esoteric. If you want, you can see the entire series on the playlist and uploading them over the next few weeks. these episodes after all from your series, you find if you find this series on comics and esotericism, consider production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Well, I want to say welcome back. Welcome back this evening to the second part of our 10-session romp through Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. And this time, right? And Kabbalah, right? We're still 1,200 years away from Kabbalah. It's still way off in the distance. So we're still very much in the time period right around the turn of the Common Era. That is to say, around the year 0, right? That's if you want to get an anchor of where we are. And just to recap a little bit from last time to sort of see where we are in the lay of the land, we defined mysticism, at least as of this class, which doing things like defining mysticism makes it certain that everybody will disagree with you that studies this stuff. So I'm just basically, anytime I say, I'm going to define mysticism, it's like putting a target on my back. But the way that I want to define it is as a non-rational mode in which one experiences or learns about fundamental reality, and also the traditions that accrue around those experiences. So I would call someone, for instance, that studies mysticism for the idea that those mystics learn fundamental truths, even though perhaps that person themselves didn't have those experiences. I would also consider that person a mystic. So I would say that there's also the idea that you lean on the mystics to learn what they learn, and that puts you in the tradition of folks who are, in fact, mystics. And there's an entire tradition in Judaism of what we'll call intellectual mystics. We'll get to those much later. And intellectual mystics are those that say, look, I never had this experience, but I trust that this person did, and I think that they're fundamentally right. So that's also, I think, another form of mysticism that actually doesn't involve mystical experiences. And as I mentioned last time, the first Jewish mystics weren't even Jewish. The first Jewish mystics were Israelites, which is a much broader. Remember that the Jews received that name, the Yehudim received that name as to say God showed up to them, God appeared to them, and on the other hand, for other people, God spoke to them. And if you speak on the behalf of God, that makes you, sometimes those folks are referred to as ro'eh, as seers. There is that we have either those folks can see the future or they hear something from God, and they communicate that to other folks. We typically referred to as the prophets. And the most theophanies in the Hebrew Bible, historically speaking at least, we don't think that the theophany of Exodus, where God showed up to the Israelites and to Moses, we're fairly confident that's a mythological piece of information, not a historical one. But we are relatively confident, many scholars are relatively confident that the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel did have some kind of phenomenological encounter. In that encounter, they recorded in the literature of the book of Isaiah and the book of Ezekiel, respectively. Now, the idea that, now you might be wondering, right, how can you say that Moses didn't exist? Well, it's not about whether he did or didn't, it's about what we have evidence for. And we just don't have evidence, really, to believe that that happened. But we have pretty good evidence to believe that the experiences of Isaiah and Ezekiel were, in fact, recorded. And as we talked about last time, prophecy is very well attested all over the ancient Near East, with the weird exception of Egypt. Egypt is kind of prophet-free, which, all things being equal, sounds great. I wouldn't want to live anywhere. I don't want any prophets in my neighborhood. I don't want any guy walking down my street screaming at people because they're like, woe to the disbelievers, you're always going to kill you all. I'm like, I'm going to call the cops on you again. So I don't want to live anywhere near prophets. And so Egypt seems like a pretty great place to be prophet-free. But at any rate, we saw last time that there are a great deal of prophets that live all through the ancient Near East, and especially in the Neo-Assyrian context, which tracks very carefully, very temporally to the ancient Israelite context. And so we actually know a great deal about other ancient Near East prophets. We also know that one of the things that happened in the ancient Near East were prophetic duels. They just didn't take prophets' words for granted because they kind of seemed crazy. And if they seemed crazy to you, they seemed kind of crazy to people back then too, right? Just because you see Jesus in your toast doesn't mean Jesus is in your toast. It might be that you might need help. And so many people in the ancient world also thought, right, this guy's just drunk, right? And there's many cases in the Bible where people do prophecy and other people are like, yeah, they're drunk. And so this was an idea. And so we see other ancient Near East cultures engaging in prophecy and other mechanisms by which to detect whether a prophecy is reliable or duels between prophets to establish which prophets are actually telling the truth. Prophetic duels needs to be a video game, just saying. It's a fighting game, but with prophets. And what brings prophecy to an end and what sets us up for our transition to the night is that, as you may remember, part of what happens in the theophany literature of the Hebrew Bible is that the God of the Israelites, Yahweh, makes themselves known by revealing a bunch of very inconvenient rules. And by revealing all these very inconvenient rules, the idea is that the Israelites are bound to follow those rules, and we will protect them and give them and provide for them to have large family, cultural surplus. Well, what ends up happening is that for various reasons, the Israel state is destroyed and the Judean state is destroyed. And as you might imagine, when your entire theology is founded on a vassal contract, and your vassal, the person who justifies your vassal relationship, gets defeated, well, that's the end of that. And so, again, it's like you're living in a house and your landlord gets bought out by, some sketchy investment firm. Well, you got a new landlord. You have no longer a relationship with the old landlord. Well, now you got to deal with other gods. And so the Israelites have some pretty complicated problems in their hands. And the pretty complicated problem on their hand is we've predicated an entire theology on one system and it didn't work. Our God seems like either God is defeated or we're defeated, and what now? Right? What do you do now with an awkward relationship with your former landlord? And so what's going to happen is that prophecy, the idea that there are people speaking on behalf of Yahweh, what's going to happen is that's going to increasingly go away, right? And a new form of religiosity is going to emerge. And that new form of religiosity that's going to emerge is going to be a new kind of mysticism. And that new kind of mysticism is what scholars typically refer to as the apocalyptic. All right. Tanakh pop quiz. But you know this was coming. So, Tanakh pop quiz, and this is a trick question because, of course, it is. You're in a class about mysticism. Does anyone here know, and feel free to put it in the chat, where in the Tanakh are the events surrounding the Hanukkah story recorded? So I think I should say they're not. That's the answer that's the less wrong answer. You're certainly right, they're not recorded straightforwardly. Anyone know where the events of the Hanukkah story are actually depicted in the Tanakh? Not in the Apocrypha, like in the book of Maccabees, where they're literally described, but in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, as you may know it. Everyone's like, why are you asking damn questions like this? I'm the one taking this class, right? So actually, you are right. It is not described transparently in Tanakh. It is, however, described encodedly in the book of Daniel. It is actually encoded in the book of Daniel. Now, the book of Daniel was probably the least read Jewish book in the Hebrew Bible. It's in some ways one of the most confusing. But historical scholars of the Hebrew Bible, scholars of the book of Daniel, are fairly confident that encoded in a very elaborate system of symbols, the story of the conquest of Syria, Judea by Alexander the Great, the civil wars between his generals that led to the various empires like the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, also with the rise of the Romans and the period of the Maccabean rebellion, are in fact described using coded language in the book of Daniel in chapters 7 through 12. If you've never read the book of Daniel, it's a very weird book. And by the way, it's one of the few books in the Hebrew Bible that actually has extensive sections actually written in Aramaic. In chapters 7 through 12, there is a section that is encoded using a very elaborate system of symbols that describes all the things I just put out. Now, what's very interesting about this section of the book of Daniel is that the writer, whoever's writing it, is describing the very beginning of the Maccabean rebellion, right? But they never describe the end of it. Now, that leaves an open question. Why don't they describe the eventual success of the Maccabeans? And they're very pro-Maccabean, at least, they're kind of tempered on the Maccabeans, actually, which a lot of people were because they were terrifying to anyone that wasn't a religious zealot. Everybody in this class would be killed by the Maccabees, just FYI. Everybody. They would have gladly killed all of us for being, like, not them. Which is always weird about Hanukkah. Hanukkah's a complicated idea if you're a progressive, liberal-minded Jewish person. Because you're like, yeah, I'm celebrating the very people that would have literally killed the Taliban, not the Taliban of Judaism. At any rate, we don't know why they don't finish. We don't know. They may have just died. You know, if it was a war and the Maccabees didn't like people who could, I don't know, read, and so they may have just got killed. It may have just gotten killed. And so we don't see the end of it. But what's interesting about it is we now have a really good idea about when the book was written, at least those sections. They were written sometimes after the Maccabean revolt began, before it ended. So we know it began around 160 and it concluded around 167 BCE. So we have a good idea about where that section of Daniel, when it was written down. Now, why would people encode things in strange language? Why would people encode things in weird symbols? Well, because there's a new kind of literature emerging, a new kind of religiosity emerging in the aftermath of the demise of the prophetic period. And that new kind of religiosity is what we call apocalypticism. Also, by the way, describing current events as if they're taking place far in the future is what we call in the literature ex eventu prophecy. The vast majority of historical prophets did not predict the future. We'll talk more about the ones that tried and failed in a minute. But the vast majority of prophets who describe all kinds of weird things, and I'm sure folks have read some sections from the book of Daniel or the book of Revelations written by St. John, or Nostradamus. So, folks have read Nostradamus. It's always weird stuff like an eagle comes from the east and attacks the great bear, and the bear follows the sun, and the sun turns to blood, and you're like, what in the hell are you talking about? They're not describing the future. They're actually describing the present using encoded language, right? This is what we call ex eventu prophecy. They're describing things that have happened using codes. Why would they do that? Well, because it might be politically expedient to be a little cryptic, right? Because again, what is one of the things these people like to do? Criticize the standard order of things. And do you really want to be the person living in the Roman Empire being like, the Romans suck and I hate them and God's going to kill them all soon? You want to publish that? You don't want to publish that because they'll crucify you for it. So what do you write? Well, the Kittim, right, will arise from the sea and then blah, 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 right? You encode it. And the encoding mechanism is part of the apocalyptic literature. So what isn't apocalyptic? That's the first thing we need to do. I know, right, that when most people hear the word apocalypticism, they're thinking end of the world. They're thinking all the crazy stuff happens at the end of the world. The Messiah's going to come, and there's going to be this and that, the Battle of Gog and Magog, and there's going to be all this stuff that happens at the end of the world, the Battle of Megiddo, whatever. And so many people typically imagine that what apocalypticism is about the future, because the word apocalypticism has been filtered so heavily through Christianity, and Christianity does tend to think of the apocalypse as like something happening in the future, although early Christians thought it was going to happen pretty soon in their lifetime. Jesus kind of dragging his feet. But they really thought it was going to happen soon. And this idea that it's going to happen in the future is an idea really from Christianity that has sort of shadowed and flavored the way that we use this word. Most apocalyptic writers, most prophets for that matter, in the Hebrew Bible and the Jewish tradition, don't do much in the way of trying to predict the future. They just don't. In fact, the most famous case where anyone tried to predict the future in the Hebrew Bible is in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 26, where Ezekiel made what at the time was the single most predictable prediction that one could predict. That is, Nebuchadnezzar would destroy Tyre. Well, he predicted that because Nebuchadnezzar was destroying everything. Everything, right? It's just like predicting, right? Like it's like American imperialism will continue. Yep, it's going on, right? It's a completely normal thing to predict. And then they attacked Tyre, and it didn't work. Nebuchadnezzar was repulsed. And so Ezekiel himself actually has to come back later. He actually comes back in the same book and says, well, what I meant was, he has to reinterpret his own prophecy to explain the fact that he was wrong, even though it was a completely actually predictable thing. So making predictions, especially clear predictions, is a bad idea, right? Folks may know the very famous quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, right? It never hurts a prophet to be too vague, right? If you predict on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2029, that blah, 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 well, your prophetic career rests on that. And so most of the prophecies, they don't predict the future by and large, right, in general, this thing. By the way, that whole Nebuchadnezzar thing, for people who are biblical literates, is a real pain in their tuchus, because they have to go back and explain why the Bible, why a prophet got it wrong, and then why a prophet admits he got it wrong, and then how he put a spin on it to fix it. And then they further spin it to further fix it. And my favorite example is, yeah, it eventually got conquered by Alexander the Great 400 years later. Somebody conquered it, so Ezekiel wasn't totally wrong. I'm like, really? That's the best you got? Okay. Most Jewish apocalyptic texts just don't have much interest in the end of the world. In fact, when they do describe the end of the world, they almost always lean on Hellenistic ideas. And those Hellenistic ideas, specifically the Stoic idea, was that basically God was going to trash everything at the end. That there was going to be some kind of global conflagration, that the world would be destroyed by a giant fire. That was a very common idea in the ancient world. And so, in many ways, the predictions they do give about the end of the world are themselves just the popular ones. If you were to go to a Greek philosopher at the time and ask, what's going to happen at the end of the world? They say, the Logos, the fire, is going to consume the whole world. They're like, sounds reasonable. They went with that. So it's actually basically, it's not even really in some sense a Jewish idea as it is a Hellenistic idea. It's a Greek idea. So let's put some context on this, right? I'm gonna say what the apocalyptic is in just a minute, but I want to put some context on this. What you have to understand about the rise of the apocalyptic is a time period in which it emerged. The political and theological upheavals that lasted from roughly about 586 BCE, when Judea was destroyed, the last independent Jewish state was destroyed, all the way up to around 135 of the Common Era, where the last attempt at an independence movement on the behalf of the indigenous people of Judea, Jews, against the Romans, led by Bar Kokhba, was defeated, with hundreds of thousands of Jewish people being killed in the process. What's important to understand about this political and theological landscape is that there is a major breakdown, as I mentioned earlier, in the theology of the time. As I mentioned earlier, right, this entire theology is built on what is called the Deuteronomic theology, which is, again, the idea that Yahweh and Israel have a covenant, and that covenant works in the way that the Israelites perform religious duties and Yahweh gives them stuff, right? So that is the way it's supposed to work. The prophets, the way that they understood themselves was as sort of a voice for God telling the Israelites, you're doing wrong, you're breaking the contract, and if you persist in this, God's going to punish you. God's going to break the contract. Well, after everything comes completely apart, beginning in the 8th century BCE, but by the 6th century BCE, the entire Judahite state is completely destroyed. There's just a serious problem. And the serious problem is, if the prophets were right, and if every single Judahite was massacred, well, that would have brought the prophecy to conclusion, right? You broke the treaty, and everyone's dead. Done, right? And that would have been a very neat, and I say neat, I mean not untidy, except for all the gore of everybody massacred, but it would have been a very tidy story theologically. Well, what happened? the Babylonians didn't kill everybody. They took the entire Judean aristocratic section into exile in Judea. And they kept on keeping on. Not in the land, right? Not in their own land, but in Babylon. And not only that, they had a good time. We have extensive records of the Jewish population living in ancient Babylon. And we know they were living relatively well. They owned slaves. They had land. They had businesses, right? In fact, their life was so good in Babylon, in exile, that when the Jewish people were allowed to return to Israel, to Judea, by the Persians, many didn't want to go. They're like, why do I want to return to like a rock that has no inhabitable land? I can live here by these rivers and we can like live in good, but this is a great empire. They didn't want to go home. And so home, right? Because they weren't born there. They were diaspora Jews living in Babylon in comfort and security. Why go back to a wasteland to rebuild something, right, that isn't that great after all? It's like a rock in the middle of the Judean desert. And this was a big problem. In fact, there had to be Jewish people actually pressuring them to go back. So again, when we talk about the Babylonian exile and weeping by the rivers of the Euphrates or whatever, a lot of those Jews were not weeping by those rivers. They were very happy to be in exile in Babylon. And we know that because we have records of them living there. The problem, again, is a theological problem. They're still there. They still believe in Yahweh. What do you do when the prophecy meant that you were supposed to be destroyed and you weren't destroyed? So, does God make a new deal with us? Should we still believe in Yahweh? Like, the temple's been destroyed. What do we do with this Yahweh thing? The covenant doesn't make sense anymore. The covenantal theology doesn't make sense because there's a remainder that contradicts it. So, what do you do? What do you do? Well, there's a couple different options. You could try to maintain the old covenantal theology, and some people did try to do that. But you can see the logical problem with trying to maintain it. The covenant's been broken, the Judahite state's been destroyed, and its aristocracy moved to Babylon. They're still alive. What to do with that? That's a real problem. Well, what arises as a way of settling that problem, right? The way of settling that problem is by shifting your theology, right? Never let a good catastrophe go to waste. You simply innovate your theology. And what ends up emerging is a new kind of Judahite theology. In fact, I might even argue that Israelite religion went into exile, but Judaism came back. The religion that the ancient Israelites practiced would be unrecognizable to anyone here. Like killing animals and burning beer and grain to appease a sky god. No one here recognizes a religion like that. But what comes out of exile is a theologically renovated religion that is much more like the Judaism that we might recognize now. So what happens is that they innovate. They theologically innovate. They develop a new theology that maintains the trappings of the old covenantal theology, but radically philosophically changes what it all means. And so, what are those kinds of changes? The first big change is that Yahweh can't just be the God of Israel anymore. To make this work, Yahweh has to be a God of everything. Not just God of Israel and what the other gods existing out there in the world, like this is what we call henotheism, right? Your God exists, my God exists, but my God can be of your God. That's what the Israelites basically believed. Now, the new shift is, not only can my God be of your God's not real. There's just one God. Monotheism emerges in the aftermath of this catastrophe. So the God of the Israelites is now said to be the only God, and that God is responsible for everything. And not just responsible for everything, but responsible for everything forever. God has a plan for the entire cosmos. Right? This is going to be decisively important. God is planning everything. And everything that happens is according to that plan, no matter how bad it is, no matter how confusing it is. In fact, the worse it is evidence for the fact that God is preparing something amazing. Right? So this kind of theology is going to be decisively important in this matter. So what also has to happen here, right, is that the Israelites, right, are going to have to begin to change the way they think about their relationship to this God. And the problem is, this God's going to have to tell them what in the world all this means. We're supposed to have this covenant, and it's supposed to do like this, and this is supposed to happen if we keep it, and this is supposed to happen if we don't. Well, we didn't, and we're still here. What's happening? Well, what ends up happening, what ends up emerging, is that new kinds of prophets emerge in which God shows them the plan. Right? And again, hear the language here, right? The older prophets heard God and communicated what God said. The new kind of prophecy sees what God showed them, and it's a much more visual movement. It's so distinct that we now think of it as a distinct kind of religiosity. It's not prophecy. Speaking on behalf of God, they're describing what God has shown them, what God has revealed to them. And that is a completely different phenomenological mode of experiencing mysticism. Right? A very different kind of mysticism indeed. Now, what precipitates this? How do they get the ability to, what underwrites this? And the answer is really complicated, and the short answer is, we don't know. We don't know. Because we don't have good records about how this goes down. The best theory I've seen is that what ends up happening is that the Judahites go into exile and they come in contact with an up-and-coming important religion called Zoroastrianism. Now you have to understand that when the Judahite prophecy is still relatively, what's the right word to describe? The ancient Babylonians are like the New Yorkers of the ancient world. They're cosmopolitan. They're literate. They have an ancient culture that's been there for 1,000 years. They are wealthy. They have multiple giant temples, each of which is larger than the Israelite temple. It was a metropolis on an order of magnitude that the ancient Judahites could not imagine. Ancient Jerusalem was a backwater. It was a tiny settlement of a few thousand people, right, with that little temple there that was, not much bigger than a basketball arena, right? You're talking about an aristocracy
What up, Zoot?
Relatively backwater people.
Are you ready to lose?
Contact with an incredibly old, incredibly literate, right? When the Judahites wanted to write diplomatic documents, they wrote it in the language of the Babylonians, Akkadian.
If you're talking, nobody can hear you.
They must have been bowled over by the hood of their existence compared to the Babylonians. Dragged off to New York, right? You just can't imagine the shell shock of what must have happened. Furthermore, coming in contact with a very dynamic new religion called Zoroastrianism. The Reform religion founded by Prophet Zoroaster, who we don't know much about. Even when he lived, it's not clear. But
what's
if I
up, big
summarize
dog?
Zoroastrianism to you, I bet it will sound immediately obvious what they believe.
What up, Tim?
Zoroastrianism is a basically dualistic religion that claims that a good god and an evil god
Yo,
are
go.
into a kind of battle for the destiny of the world. The forces of good.
Yo, what are you saying? Talk.
Non-physical spiritual entities, and those non-physical spiritual entities are in combat with other non-physical entities that serve the bad guys. Angels and
No,
demons.
generally it is. People try to organize it into such, but
is going to result in a titanic,
it is
catastrophic battle at the end of time.
it is more of
The forces of good will
a
win.
lack of
They will
belief.
throw the forces of evil into a neither world, right? And not only that, there are even Zoroastrian prophets of the underworld that was influenced.
Wait a minute, Doc.
By these tours of the Zoroastrian literature.
Basically,
Now,
who's
here in the
more
world,
likely
there's going
to
to
be
be a
right
savior
about
figure,
right about a religion?
who will lead the forces of good against the
Humans
forces of
or
evil.
some alien
And
species out there?
at the end of time,
Aliens.
everyone will be resurrected bodily. They will be judged, right? And there is a massive set of literature being composed by Zoroaster. And the idea is that your relationship to Scripture is more important in many ways than doing
knows all the answers that we don't know.
Perhaps, big dog.
Those priests, by the way, are called magi. You may recognize them from the Bible, right? Those are the guys that show up to adore Jesus.
Nope.
At any rate, that should all sound pretty familiar to most of us. If you take a little Judaism and add a little Zoroastrianism to it, shake it up in your cocktail shaker, pour in a glass, you have all the ingredients for a great cocktail.
Are you ready to lose?
Christianity or Islam or apocalyptic Judaism.
Are you sure?
Now, again, many people detest the
Have you ever been more of anything in your life?
Influence, informed, changed by non-Jewish. When the Jews
Rabbi.
What up,
in this
pimp?
area, they would have viewed them
It's
as
just entertainment to an alien species.
superior.
That could be.
I can guarantee you they would have been influenced by them. They would have been
What if they're like
huge
billions and
impact.
billions and billions of miles away, but they can still see us with their like telepathic community?
You may know Freddie Mercury is a
I mean, telescopic community, like telepathic would be like reading, like communicating us, communicating to us without words to our brain. Telescopic would mean like zooming in on us.
In Iraq, or in India rather, but they're not doing that great, unfortunately. They're pretty small. So, we've now talked a little bit about the groundwork for apocalypticism. What is it, right? We call it a religious mode, but I use the word mode there for folks who have some background in philosophy, right? A mode of being. It's a way of doing religion. It's not a religion itself, but it's an articulation within a religion. It began to exist primarily in Judaism, but Judaism perfected. It's when, in fact, apocalypticism becomes the religion. Right?
Dude, the invite, you're going to jerk yourself raw.
And the apocalyptic is what really is, and Judaism becomes an adjunct riding on the tails of the apocalypticism. One can imagine Christianity that way, but also in Islam. It's also largely an apocalyptic religion. Again, it's a religion based on a guy being shown. It's fundamentally an apocalyptic religion. So what makes the apocalyptic? Now, what's important to know about this is that no one sat down in Judea or in Babylon and said, I'm going to invent apocalypticism. What they did was be religious. And they
What are you
innovated.
listening to?
And the specific religious innovations that they developed, we now call apocalypticism.
Why are you
So it's very important to know this is a
listening to it?
scholarly term applied
So
to
want to?
ancient people. And it's always important to know that when you do that, when you apply a schema to ancient people, it never
Are you learning about religion?
right?
It's more just a review.
But it's such a stable kind of scheme.
Or
Prophetic religion of ancient Israel.
what times?
The first thing is what I mentioned here.
I got
I'll mention it first.
Four.
That's the last one.
I'll be happy.
Shit.
Writing the word apocalypsis in Greek, which means to reveal or to uncover. And what's important about this literature is that what tends to group it all together is the idea that God is revealing something fundamental to the person, to the apocalyptic prophet. God's not speaking to the apocalyptic prophet, telling them, go condemn, I don't know, some king, especially like king, right? Go condemn those people for being bad and being rich. That's the way a prophet like Amos worked. God spoke, and Amos went and said, right, woe to you people, cows of Bashan. No, here we have God revealing various kinds of things to a human agent. And typically, that's being mediated by a divine, semi-divine being, typically an angel. So an angel shows up and says, let me show you something. And what do they show them? Kinds of things. Typically things like culture. Apocalypticism is very interested in how the universe works. If you've ever read the Hebrew Bible, one of the things that is weirdly missing from the Hebrew Bible is discussion of right? There's no rules of like, what is the world exactly? Because they're not really interested in what is the world exactly, right? They're interested in what's going on in Judea with this thing.
Is peer pressuring
cosmology becomes
someone
very
to fuck
important
someone
in,
else?
in the apocalyptic mode of Judaism. Also, they're very interested in the past.
It's not good, I can tell you that.
Considering that most people think of apocalypticism as primarily dealing
It's not
with
good,
the
I can tell you that.
but mostly the apocalypticists are
What'd you say?
interested in the past.
It's not good.
Oh, where you
So
are?
they're very interested in
It's not good, I can tell you that.
and the thing that they're very interested
It should be.
in is where did evil
Okay.
come from? Right? Because if evil is in the world and it's out there, what kind of existence does it have? And they're very interested in where it came from. You'll never see much in the Hebrew Bible about them discussing the origins of evil. Right? Even the whole talking snake in the Garden of Eden, the writer of that story in the book of Hebrews said it names some things, right? Go up to work for bread and women's child pain and the pain in having a child will increase. By the way, it says that the pain will increase. It never says it wasn't. Off the rails, right? The apocalyptists will be very interested in this.
So why are you losing by so much?
Right? The Bible doesn't do much more of symbolism on it, right? But the apocalyptists will be very interested in symbolism.
Because I'm going to get the bonus, which will help me.
Are you sure about that?
And also, again, as I mentioned earlier with the exhibit to prophecy, they're going to be really interested in engaging in the same kind of social criticism that some of these local Israelite prophets, but they're going to be doing it in a way that in a literary form in which they encode those criticisms by describing them as if they're happening.
Oh, fuck you, Zoot.
Right? So they describe
What up,
presidents
Zoot?
in a code way as if they're happening in
What?
the future. That's going to be a tip-off.
I'm just going to play the launch track and we'll talk again.
Amos didn't encode anything. He called people cows for being rich. He's like, you people are bad because you're rich and God hates you.
You know what the worst part about that is for you?
What's that, Zoot?
He's like, I hate you people and God hates you too, right? That's not what these apocalyptic folks do. Also, what they're really interested in is in oppression and tribulation. Specifically, why bad things keep happening to us. If our God is the only God, and we have a special relationship with this God, why did the Greeks just like whip our ass? Like, that's a bad thing. Like, we just got whipped by the Romans. They just killed like a bunch of us. Like, what's going on, God? Right? That's a real important question to ask, right? I mean, we all ask the sort of why bad things happen to people question.
For sure.
It's like, why did we all get wiped out? Or most of us. They're very interested in why this tribulation is happening, right? And again, I say tribulation. The idea is it's really bad for a while, but for the apocalypticists, God has a plan. And not only that, the apocalypticists claim to know the plan, right? They claim to know the plan. They're also at some level interested in the end of the world. Right? Now, and I say the end of the world, what they're really interested in is the righteous being rewarded and it being damned. There's no hint of that in the Israelite religion. Everybody in the Israelite religion went to the same underworld. Sheol. It doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person. Well, the apocalyptists,
yeah, baby.
That's not fair. Bad people will get punished. This idea comes directly probably from Zoroastrianism, right? So bad people get punished and the good people will get rewarded. That's the extent, really, of how things are going to go down in the future. And of course, right? Why does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because a lot of good people, or at least people they thought they were good, were suffering enormously under foreign occupation.
Oh, I clicked the wrong thing. I clicked the wrong thing.
It's very dualistic. That is to say, the world in apocalyptic literature is very certified between the good guys and the bad guys.
What were you meant to play?
Right? Good guys are going to win, bad guys are going to lose. You don't see that in Israelite religion.
I missed it too.
The prophets are, you're doing bad, but if you do good, God will not punish you. In apocalypticism is, you are bad, and God is going to destroy you. It's a much more dualistic world. Which again, if you study history, in times of intense political crisis, right, dualism emerges. The good guys and the bad guys, right? Whether it's the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or sons of Horus, sons of Miss, polarize the world, and that's all they describe. And again, I think Marxism is a kind of apocalypticism in many ways. He would hate that idea, but he can happily roll in his grave. Paying back some of that anti-Semitism on the Jewish question. So anyway, right? Also, what's really important about apocalypticism is someone's going to fix all this.
Fucking bullshit. I think I'm
Because clearly, if you look at the time period being conquered by the Greeks and conquered by the Romans, being massacred by various people,
What up,
it's
Tim?
pretty clear that we're not going to be the ones to fix this.
Do you know
And so what do we say? There's going to be some kind of
Yes, it is. Are you going to call Riser?
enter into history and fix all this. And that, of course,
Riser's
for
gonna-
a little while becomes a fine
I don't want to go over.
Why not?
that some person, or persons, by the way, early messianism
We're gonna
never
play
agreed about how many would be.
Why are we calling
And
Riser?
probably would be two messiahs. And one of those
We're
would
playing
die,
bowling.
right?
Okay, why are we calling Riser?
Military general and win. So ancient Judaism was never clear about there being just one Messiah. Many sections of Judaism actually believe there would be at least two.
Why do you say that?
So, right? Now the Christians fix that by like having him die and come back later. They're just waiting on that last part. So they just kind of roll it into one.
Why do you say that?
Also, there's all kind of anti-Messiah characters, right? If you have a good guy fighting for the good guys, you're gonna have a bad guy fighting for bad guys. That's the Antichrist, and there are lots of different stories about.
Yeah, why would you say that?
Christianity really likes the bad guys too, and they make for good guys. The structure of heaven and hell is going to be a big
Riser.
part of the apocalyptic world. If they're going to describe to you where you're going to go when you die or when you get resurrected, they want you to know about it. And if there's really vivid depictions
Riser.
of the
Or
hellish
Zoo.
worlds and the afterlife, it's pretty motivating. Like, I don't want to go there where they like boil you in excrement.
Zoo, why would you say that?
Bad. I don't want to go there. I'm going to be a good guy.
What are we playing?
Right?
Zoo,
So
why
they're
would you
very,
say that?
very interested in the structures of the various heavens and the hells. And they're also interested in the idea
Okay, but do you
that
realize
behind
that
the
that's
scenes,
not
what's
funny?
apparent to us, the world is actually being dominated by
Hello,
a vast majority
Okay, well, why don't you call him then?
of spiritual creatures.
Hey,
Technically, we don't know them as
Rabbi.
angels and demons.
Dude, I asked you a
And so,
question.
again, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, there are basically very little in terms of angels and demons. They kind of show up from time to time.
Zoo, why don't you call Riser?
Apocalyptic, they are everywhere. Angels and demons
Can we
are
play
literally
bowling on 10
all
frames?
around you, engaging in
We can play bowling if you call Riser.
for the destiny of the world,
Can we play it with 10 frames?
right? And every
We
country
can
has
play
its
on
own
10 frames if you
right?
call
Gabriel's
Riser.
angel of this country, Gabriel's angel of this country, and every country has their own demon, etc.
Do we usually play on 5 frames or 10
The
frames?
scale of things is
Five,
so
because
big.
you're awful.
In Israelite literature, they kind of
Why don't we
like
switch
the
it to 10
Egyptians,
to see if I'm
and
better?
they kind of don't
No,
like the Assyrians.
you're just going to be
But
worse.
you never have a
Call
global
Riser,
analysis of
and
the
then we
world.
can play one
Because
game of
they're
10
kind of
frames.
parochial people. The apocalyptic writers are not parochial. They imagine the entire world
What if he
divided
doesn't
into
know?
countries, and they explain
You don't know
science
until you do
in
it.
terms of the spiritual battles that are going on behind the scenes
Tell you,
that we don't see.
Okay, but why don't you call him?
Literature, which we'll talk about more in just a moment, is typically pseudo-anonymous, although they like to claim that very ancient people wrote them. So Enoch wrote this, or Abraham wrote this, or Shem, right?
I'm
So they
Ray.
like to allege ancient authorship.
Ray.
Because, if it's just like Menachem the Jew down the street wrote this, who cares, right? Like, Manny wrote a book about angels? Oh, yeah, Manny, the guy that fixes their shoes. Like, the hell does he know, right? So, Manny the shoe guy, Manny the cover's like, nah, Enoch wrote this, right? And so he puts Enoch's name on it, right? The patriarch who never died and was like, Noah's grandfather, whatever, or father, Noah's father, like, yeah, Enoch. That dude,
Rabbi,
he was
Rabbi,
real.
Rabbi.
Let's read his book. Right?
Oh,
So throw a name on
no
there, and people
fucking
read your book.
way.
You're not going to read Manny's book about the end of
Can
the
we
world.
play?
No one cares about
Can we
that.
play 10 frames now?
Yes.
So let's talk about this literature, right? Let's get into
So
what
it
makes this
can
work,
go
right? Why
back.
would anyone write all this stuff down? Well, the first is historical and psychological. You're living as Judahites in a world of theological and
good,
political
gang?
turmoil.
Doug, I slept so long today.
I don't know about you. I don't.
Yes.
No person I don't think of, right, essentialist as the day is long, right? And you're still going to want to know what's going on. Why is it happening? Right? Why is it happening? Very few people are going to suffer through immense, like, physical physical and psychological turmoil to themselves. So what do? They try to explain why it's happening. Further, right? Not that they want to explain why it's happening, they want to feel like it's not for no reason. No one likes the idea
I wish I
that you
didn't
just went through a traumatic
suggest playing
experience
10 frames.
and it's meaningless. You're on a rock.
You demanded it.
In the middle of a void in a 4 billion
I
year
thought
planet,
10 frames
everything
per
that's
second
ever
or
happened to
something.
you. It's not like you're not going to
No.
be a memory. This Earth won't even exist.
Is that my
We
fault?
don't want to. That doesn't make sense from a human perspective. We want to understand why our traumas are happening. We want our traumas to mean something. And so,
So close.
what they mean? Well, the overwhelming data we get from the apocalyptic literature is that God is
Rabbi's going to
everything that's happening in the world.
Rabbi's going
So
to
this is very deterministic literature, and that your suffering is not random. It's part of a plan.
Perfect game.
And what's that plan? The end of the world. Right? The world is going in a very specific direction, and God is going to make things right. Punishing the wicked, rewarding the righteous.
That was
all
awful.
part of the plan. I think awesome.
Dude, 10 frame is so long. Dude, 10 frame is so long. Why did you say 10 frame? 10 frame is so long.
People can get through anything. As long as they have a reason why it's happening. Right? I think I may have it backwards. Right? So the idea here is that basically what it's all the apocalypticist has been part of this entire whole
Oh, like the resolution?
No one likes being colonized. No one likes being oppressed.
Wild.
No one likes having their country destroyed by foreigners. No one likes foreigners moving into their country and taking all their stuff and
It's
enslaving
clearly 5 frames per second. It's about 40 frames.
And so you want to protest against it, right? You want to protest against it, right? When the French come into Algeria and destroy that country,
Bro, how many frames per second do you think this game is?
69.
Protest against it. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can protest. One way to
Okay,
protest
that's a bad guess.
is militarily trying to fight their
So
own.
I guessed it, baby.
You can try that. And people did. And they had very limited success. You can also write books about how they're bad. And God hates them, and God's going to judge them, and God's going to kill them.
Dude, did you know that it's your turn?
Now, again, as I said earlier, you can't come out and just write that way.
Dude, you know that you have the lead on Riser?
Tiberius sucks. God's going to kill him. They're always going to be like, that's interesting. How would you like to
Dude,
be
we are
Christ?
never
They're
playing.
not going to do it. They're coded. And if you know, you right? I'm a being, right? If you know, you know. And anyone who knew how to read this literature,
What up? What's the best person song?
Yeah, what's the best passion?
Oh, that one that you sang last night?
God has to reveal to you the plan. You, the apocalyptic prophet.
Better go.
And that's
Yeah.
what this literature is. It's the
That's just the
plan.
most popular.
It's the
Okay,
way the
well,
world is
don't you
structured.
think
God
that
built the
it's
world.
popular
God
because it
structured
could be the
world.
best?
History itself is unfolding according to very set
Oh, no
rules
way,
set
Zoo.
down by God,
Get it.
and everything
Get it.
is part of the plan.
Get it.
It's part of the plan.
Popular
And the apocalyptic literature is
is
marked
almost marketed. So
by that reveal,
Okay.
that uncovering. As you might imagine, in a world of turmoil, which I know Jewish people go through
I
turmoil.
mean, we might have some fucking gems in this disorder. That's awesome.
You can imagine this is an incredibly persuasive form of religiosity.
Oh, no.
It explores
Riser,
all the
I'm
ways
so worried.
why bad things were happening. It told
Psych,
you where it all
baby.
came from.
I'm on
It tells you how
fire.
it's gonna all end. And it tells you that
Oh,
the things that you're going
What
through
up, Zoo?
as a people, as an individual,
Has there ever been a one-hit wonder, right?
and
A
they're not
one-hit
punishment from
wonder
God.
while they were alive
But the only
that
time
songs
every bad
got
thing
more
happens to you is
popular after
punishment
they
from Yahweh. Right? No. You're
Yeah,
suffering. That's part of the
arguably
plan.
Otis Redding.
Yahweh is secretly
He won a
collaborating
Grammy after he
with all these
died.
people. That idea,
Otis Redding.
right, is one of the most seductive ideas imaginable.
What was
And
his
again,
one-hit
when I
wonder
try
when he
this
was
on the things like,
alive?
again, folks may know,
Sitting on the dock of the bay.
It's difficult to read much Marxist propaganda as anything other than repackaged.
What a good spare, Zoo.
So do you think?
It reads very much
Do you
like
think?
apocalyptic.
Do you think there'll be like more like one people you consider one hit wonders when they die that discography will be digged up and people will go, holy shit, this is amazing.
Yeah, I do. Or it'll be featured in a commercial or like a television show or movie or something.
Didn't we heard this already? Right?
No, I think commercials are dying.
Okay, well that's a cool story.
When was the last time you watched a commercial?
Yeah, today.
For hundreds of years. One could even argue for
What commercial?
years.
It was for the competition. Yeah, I watched one for cinnamon rolls yesterday or the day before. I like looked it up. It was from the 1990s. What a good shot. It was for Pillsbury cinnamon rolls that were offered at Burger King, and they have Minnie Riperton who sang this song, and she like orgasms at the end of the commercial, and it always stuck out in my mind like, dude, I can't believe they had like a woman orgasm at the end of a commercial for cinnamon rolls.
Do you think it's hard? Do you think it's harder to get a spare roll?
A strike?
When the Roman soldiers were like, why are they blowing and stuff? Right?
Dude, consider yours to be dog shit at bowling or just terrible? It's a great question, Zoo. I don't know.
I'm dope.
Yeah.
On the scale of dog,
The big books of the Hebrew Bible, like the book of Daniel, is imbued with apocalypticism. The War Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls is a very apocalyptic text. Perhaps the most famous apocalyptic text of all time is the Book of Enoch, a book not included in either Christian or Jewish literature, but preserved, thank God, by the heroic people of Ethiopia, who have never been colonized, FYI, because they fought like the devil to have it not happen, and they're brilliant tacticians. They preserve all these writings.
I don't think so.
In Judaism. So anytime
Oh, what a great spare.
what the Ethiopian people have done to preserve Jewish writings, I am in enormous thanks for what they've done.
I agree.
So what's going to also happen, and we'll get to this next time, is that apocalypticism is also going to give rise to a new form of mysticism called the Merkaba mysticism, which we'll be discussing next time.
No.
How do you get this vision?
Yeah,
How
he
do you
will.
go
He
see
will.
what God
No
has to
doubt.
show you, or what angels have to show you? Well,
But neither of you are
for
touching.
this, and a new form of mysticism arose.
No.
It's a subset of apocalypticism in which mystics describe going into God's palaces and being shown this stuff. We'll get to them next week. It's
What are you gonna get, like 150?
69.
As you might imagine, that's pretty interesting. Apocalyptic Judaism, right, and rabbinical Judaism, however, never quite saw the rabbis never fully embraced apocalypse. The rabbis are all about the apocalyptic people out there.
Correct.
Like, God's going to judge you people tomorrow, right? So, in many ways, apocalyptic Judaism was never quite meshed with rabbinical
This is the most
Judaism.
difficult shot in the game, folks.
Again, one famous quote from the Talmud, right? It says that for every time you try to calculate when the Messiah will come,
Yeah, she did. I've seen her do it twice, I think.
The years that you calculated. The rabbis don't like this, right? When Rabbi Akiva said, right, that Shimon Bar Kokhba is the save us all, the other rabbis made fun of him. They'll grow your cheeks before the Messiah comes. That's not gonna happen. Unfortunately, grass didn't grow in his cheeks because he didn't get buried because he was burned alive.
You need to get
So, sometimes right? The apocalyptic is very, very dangerous. But it was incredibly popular. On the screen right now is a short list of all
He did it, Zoo.
from this time period.
He did it.
If I were to grab my collection of apocalyptic literature,
You think I'm Alright, you don't even. You can get free copies.
right, was produced in the very copies of the book of Torah, folks. That's like there are more copies of the book of Enoch there, right? They're more interested in Enoch.
It's over, folks. It's over.
Rabbi, what do you think the chances are this virus being the next go?
95%. 99%.
I don't think so.
And Christians underwent turmoil too.
Zoot, you have an invitation and everyone's awaiting you.
They're being marginalized.
Riser, you have an invitation and everyone's awaiting you.
They face their own turmoil.
I do think this strain of hantavirus will be around for a while.
Okie doke. I like how you're a virologist. I like how Zoot is a
I don't think COVID level. I don't know.
All right. Do you know if Riser's going to go?
I mean,
This is the worst shot I've ever seen.
I don't want this virus to spread. It has a 40% mortality rate. It's that strong, but viruses, if they're respiratory, they get weaker.
Doug, how are you believing a 40% mortality rate? That means that like 40% of those people on that cruise ship are going to die? Get out of here. What kind of bullshit is the British media teaching you?
Well, that's not the same strain. That's not the same strain.
Okay. Is it the same strain that's going to make Riser not?
Oh, too much.
One of the shots ever. Zoot has one of the worst shots ever, but he's going to block Riser.
Over and over and over again. The rabbis don't like
What?
this. And they marginalize it.
What?
It eventually prevents
That
Judaism.
only. That didn't go in the water.
Apocalyptic literature. And very little of it gets produced. So not so little gets produced.
Sheep. I could see that.
My shot go in the water.
There are some texts that do get
Riser is fucked. That sheep fucked Riser so badly. That might have been the biggest fucking of an animal by an animal we've ever seen. That was straight up bestiality. Riser has just straight up given up in this game. Riser gives up in the game. I know, but your strategy's awful. It's dog shit. I went in the water on my drive, and I still...
Oh, there's a sequel there. Dude, I knew that. There's a sequel there. Unbelieve me. I don't know, it was like the perfect spot to put it. It's like no one ever shoots it onto like the other side, like the arrows. I know you played the Texas.
And other kinds of things. And again, of course, those folks. Part of the reason what motivated them to stay in that building was
That's a good shot.
History, and of course that probably led to them being massacred by the U.S. government. They had their own hand to play in it too, but I do think that was.
You memorized the like percentage thing.
What do you want me to do, dog? What do you want me to do?
Judaism and Kabbalah are going to win the day over and against apocalypse. Judaism was enormously important over the course of about 500 years. Judaism specifically, and it is made.
Riser's going in the tar.
religiosity. I might even argue that apocalypticism as a mode of religiosity is perhaps the dominant religious mode in the world.
That's incorrect.
I would make that argument, I think. But what's going to emerge in terms of mysticism?
I'm gonna make mine. I'm gonna make it
together.
Riser can't make it.
Practical apocalypticism.
Sick.
As a mystic's attempt to tend into the throne room of God is going to emerge out of the apocalyptic literature.
Alright,
And
you
that
start straight down.
mysticism is going to be what we're tackling next week.
Yeah, I don't think I'll go in with this thing.
Merkava, chariot mysticism. You also may know the word
Oh,
Merkava.
Yes,
The
welcome.
Israelis have named a tank. Their
Nice.
movement of the
Dog, what the fuck is this?
after the chariot of God, which seems
One of the best shots that either of you have ever witnessed, and I did it without even thinking, because I'm a pimp and I'm a West Side gangster.
If you were to review a
apocalyptic literature reader, it's just a collection of apocalyptic literature.
Zoot, am I allowed to give it negative scores?
The large scholar of apocalypticism.
Zero.
I mean, what do you want me to do about it, dog? Did I choose the whole? Did I choose to go first?
And of course, also John Reeves has published another text on trajectories in Near Eastern apocalypticism, and this actually covers Jewish apocalypticism through the Middle Ages. It doesn't get much play, mostly because a lot of it's not been translated, but Reeves provides.
Do you guys want to make it illegal to use the tent in the future?
There's also forms of apocalypticism that survive into Jewish apocalypticism that survives into the Middle Ages. So, again, another form of mysticism that emerges.
I don't know, it's part of the game.
The breakdown of prophecy, but renovates prophecy.
Would you agree with this statement, Raza?
Phenomenologically different task to show rather than tell, and show what
You're safe in not being born.
plan of the universe and how you, as a Jew, right, or as a non-Jew, maybe as a Roman,
Safe for not being born than being born.
and that mysticism, I think, is just incredibly important. Christianity.
What does that even mean?
No one knows what that means.
It's none of this is imagined.
You're never in danger. If you're never born, you're never in danger.
Beginning of the 4th century. Welcome back and thank you for joining me as I explore.
Riser, go.
Is being in danger bad?
Riser, go.
Yes.
Can't believe that I cannot be beaten, that it's over, that I could be. Why would you do such a thing, Zoot?
Because he's ready to watch the founder.
Zoot, are you ready to watch The Founder?
I'm saying it.
Okay. Does that mean that you can't watch it again?
I fucking hate that movie.
Dude, it's like the best movie of the last 10 years. I hate that movie. One bitch, Linda Cardarelli, who is beautiful.
It's just about the. It's just about